Are you teaching my sons to pray? What the hell is this? A church? Alexander Reed's voice exploded down the hallway like a bomb, and for a moment, time seemed to stop inside the softly lit bedroom. Caleb and Julian, the 5-year-old twin boys, sat frozen on the rug, their small hands still clasped in prayer. Across from them, kneeling in her simple gray house shoes, was Selena William. Her lips had just finished leading them through a gentle whisper, a bedtime prayer for their late mother. Before Maya could say another word, Alexander stepped into the room like a storm, his 6'2" frame brimming with fury, dark eyes flashing. In his hand was the mail he had been sorting through. And without thinking, he hurled the stack of unopened envelopes and a nearby hardcover book toward the floor at her feet. One skidded and hit Ma's shin, making her flinch and stumble back. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. "Are you teaching my sons to pray? What is this? Some kind of holy crusade? This is my house, and I will not tolerate religious brainwashing under my roof." Maya's breath caught, her back gently hitting the wall behind her as she raised her palms in a nervous, protective gesture. "Mr. Reed, please. I didn't mean any harm. They were just talking about their mother, and they miss her so much. I thought maybe if they said something, up toward heaven, they'd feel a little less." "I don't want to hear it," Alexander snapped, his finger stabbing the air. "You don't fill my sons' heads with nonsense about heaven or spirits or any of that imaginary garbage. We don't do that in this house. I don't raise my children on fairy tales and false hope." Caleb stood up quickly, his small voice trembling. "Daddy, she just told us we could talk to Mom." Julian added, "not like church stuff. Just like if we say how we feel, maybe Mom will hear it. That's all." Maya looked at the boys, her heart cracking as she saw the fear in their eyes. "I didn't preach anything," she said quickly, her voice trembling now. "I just wanted them to feel less alone. That's all. I'm so sorry, Mr. Reed. I didn't mean to disrespect your beliefs, but Alexander wouldn't hear it. You did disrespect them," he said, his voice like stone. "You knew the rules. You broke them. I'm done. Pack your things. You're gone first thing tomorrow." Caleb's eyes welled up. "No, Daddy, please don't send her away. She helps us sleep. She helps us feel better." Julian whispered. "Enough," Alexander bellowed, his face darkening. "Back to your room now." The boys hesitated. Caleb's hand clung to Maya's skirt, and she gently guided it away. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Go!" Alexander shouted. Startled, the boys ran, tears silently streaming down their cheeks as they disappeared down the hallway. Maya stood alone now, the room suddenly too big and too silent. She swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice low and pleading, "please don't fire me. I didn't mean to overstep. I didn't think. You didn't think." "That's right," Alexander said, turning away. "And now you're done. That's the end of it." "No, I promise I won't do it again," Maya said quickly, stepping forward just slightly. "I'll follow every rule. I won't even talk about anything you don't want. I care about those boys." Alexander didn't look back. "You'll be gone by morning." And with that, he left her standing there. She felt the heat in her cheeks, the sting of humiliation, and the trembling in her knees. Alone in the quiet room, she sat down slowly on the edge of the boy's bed, her hands shaking in her lap. If you feel for the character, give this video a like, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from. You might be surprised to find neighbors nearby watching too. The next morning, Maya left early. Quietly, she didn't say goodbye. Alexander hadn't given permission, but before she closed the door behind her, she left a small shoebox on the kitchen counter. Inside were 2 crayon drawings the boys had made. One showed Maya standing under a star-filled sky with Caleb and Julian holding hands and looking upward. Above them was a smiling woman in the clouds, their mother. The second drawing was more personal, a bedtime scene, a stick figure, Maya, reading to the twins while they smiled. A crescent moon hung overhead. Caleb beneath the pictures was a short note written in careful cursive. "Mr. Reed, I understand you're angry. I'm sorry I broke your trust. I wasn't trying to teach them religion. I only offered a small way to cope with missing someone they love. At that age, grief is too heavy to carry alone. I wanted to give them something soft to hold on to. Maya." Alexander found the box just after breakfast. He read the note once, then shoved the lid back on hard. He didn't want to feel anything. Not remorse, not doubt. He was a man of reason, logic, reality. But in the days after Maya's departure, things began to shift quietly, painfully. Caleb and Julian no longer bounced into the kitchen with sleepy grins. They stopped asking for story time. They stopped asking for anything. They became withdrawn. They didn't look Alexander in the eye. When he spoke to them, they nodded without words. They obeyed quickly, but not warmly. Their joy, already fragile, had dulled. At first, Alexander didn't want to admit it. He blamed Maya. She made them soft, he muttered one night. Swirling a glass of bourbon, filled their heads with fantasies, turned them against me. But late at night, when the boys were asleep and the house echoed with silence, he knew better. He knew they were afraid of him. 3 days later, Alexander canceled 3 board meetings. He told his assistant to clear the week. No calls, no emails, just him and his boys. He didn't know what he was doing. He never had to try to connect with his children before. That had been Emily's role. She was warmth, song, softness. He was structure, safety, the provider. But now with her gone and Maya no longer in the house, he realized the boys had no softness left, and it was killing them. So he began watching. He didn't push himself into their space, but he sat in the background. He offered to make breakfast, burnt the pancakes, but they laughed a little. He read from their favorite dinosaur book. Even if he stumbled, he sat with them during cartoons and laughed at jokes he barely understood. He listened slowly. Something shifted. Caleb smiled first. Then Julian asked to sit in his lap. One evening, Alexander found the boys whispering near the window. "Who are you talking to?" he asked gently. Julian turned and said, "Just Mom." Alexander froze. "You think she can hear you?" Caleb shrugged. Miss Maya said, "Maybe not with ears, but with love." Alexander sat down beside them. "Do you believe that?" Julian nodded. "Yeah. And when we talk to her, it doesn't hurt so much." The room was quiet. Alexander didn't argue because deep down he still ached for Emily too, and no amount of logic had healed that. He finally whispered, "It doesn't hurt so much." Caleb smiled softly. "No, it feels like she's close." Alexander looked at his boys, truly looked and saw something he hadn't allowed himself to see before. Peace, not delusion, not fantasy, just peace. And it hadn't come from toys or therapy or distraction. It had come from a woman he'd fired in anger for giving his sons exactly what he had been too afraid to give them. Hope. Soft, quiet, sacred hope. That night, something unexpected happened. "Dad," Julian said, climbing onto his lap as they sat in the boys' bedroom, "can you pray with us tonight?" Alexander blinked. "Me?" Caleb nodded just like we used to with Miss Maya. He hesitated. Then, without saying another word, he slowly lowered himself onto the rug between their beds. The boys reached out, one hand on each side. He took their small hands into his own. They bowed their heads. Julian whispered first, then Caleb. Their words were simple, honest. "Miss you. Love you. Thank you." Then silence. Alexander swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. His throat tightened, but something in him cracked open, and he finally whispered, barely audible, "I miss her too, every day." There was no lightning strike, no revelation, just quiet stillness, and a weight he didn't know he was carrying began to lift. When he tucked them into bed, Julian grabbed his hand. "Daddy?" "Yes, Bud. Can you ask Miss Maya to come back?" Alexander poe-tit. "Please," Caleb added. "Well, be good, we promise." Alexander sat there for a long time, looking at the ceiling, then at the boys. "I think," he said slowly, "I owe her an apology." And for once, the boys fell asleep, smiling. And Alexander stayed a while longer, whispering one last sentence into the stillness. "I've been too hard, too strict. But I see it now. I see what they need, what I need." Tomorrow he would make a call, and maybe, just maybe, Mia would answer. The phone rang twice before a soft, hesitant voice answered on the other end. "Hello. This is Maya." Dorian Reed sat in his home office, the early morning light seeping through the tall windows behind him. He was still in his robe, a half-empty cup of coffee cooling on the desk beside him, his hand tightened slightly around the phone. "Maya, it's Dorian Reed." There was a pause, brief but heavy. "I didn't think I'd hear from you again," she said carefully. "No anger. Just caution." Alexander cleared his throat. "I wasn't sure I'd be calling you again either, but here I am." Silence. He stood and began pacing, hand in his hair. "I owe you an apology. A real one. I didn't just overreact that night. I lost control. I humiliated you. I scared you. And I dismissed something you gave my sons that I didn't understand at the time." Maya's voice was quiet. "They miss you. They talked about you a lot those last few days. More than I expected. They miss you, Maya. He said, they've been lost without you. I've been trying. God, I've really been trying to fill the space you left behind. But I can't. Not the way you did. And now they're asking me to bring you back. Maya took a breath on the other end. I don't want to walk back into a place where I'm not welcome. You'd be welcome this time, he said firmly. On your terms. No restrictions, no conditions about what you can or can't say to my kids. I'm not that man anymore. A moment passed, then another. Finally, Mia said softly, I'll think about it. I'll cover your transportation, anything you need, Alexander said quickly. Just please consider it. She didn't promise. She didn't hang up angrily either. They said goodbye quietly, and Alexander placed the phone down, heart pounding harder than it had in any boardroom. 3 days later, Maya stood on the front porch of the Reed estate, her suitcase in hand. She hesitated before ringing the bell, expecting maybe a butler or one of the staff, but the door opened almost instantly. And there he was. Alexander, not in a blazer, no intimidating presence, just a man in a plain button-down shirt and slacks, eyes tired but softer than before. Maya, he said, his voice low, thank you for coming. She stepped inside cautiously, scanning the place. The air felt different and quieter, not heavy with pressure like before. From the hallway came a loud gasp. Miss Maya! Caleb and Julian rushed down the stairs barefoot, their small arms wrapping tightly around her legs. She laughed, a sound neither boy had heard in weeks. You two are growing already, Maya said, crouching to hug them both. Alexander watched from the side, arms folded, guilt etched behind his eyes. When the boys disappeared to the kitchen to grab cookies for her, he stepped forward. I've gone over that night again and again, he said, and I realized something. It wasn't just your prayer that I hated. It was the peace in their eyes when they said it. I didn't understand it. I was jealous of it. Maya blinked, surprised by the honesty. I've lived my whole life by facts, Maya. Results, numbers, believing only what I can prove. But nothing I've done, not my money, my company, my careful parenting, could give those boys what you gave them in a 2-minute prayer. She nodded slowly. It wasn't the prayer. It was permission to grieve, to feel, to believe. Their mom's love didn't vanish. Alexander lowered his head. Can you forgive me? Maya studied him for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. Yes, but it's not just my forgiveness you need. Later that evening, after dinner, Maya found herself sitting on the floor of the twins' bedroom again. The rug still had the same soft pattern. The toys were slightly more scattered, but everything felt familiar. Alexander stood at the doorway, awkward, unsure. Caleb looked up. Daddy, are you going to sit with us again? Alexander stepped forward and sank to the rug beside them. If that's okay, Julian grinned. It's more than okay. Maya glanced at him, searching his face. Would you like to lead it tonight? She asked gently. Alexander hesitated. I'm not sure I know how. There's no right way, Ma said. Just honesty. The boys held his hands on either side. He took a breath, unsure if what he was about to say would make sense to anyone but him. Hi, he said aloud, looking up at the ceiling. It's me. I don't really know how this works, but if you're listening, Emily, I want you to know the boys are okay. They're stronger than I ever imagined. He glanced at them, then back to the ceiling. And I'm trying to be too, he paused. Also, I'm sorry for not letting them speak to you, for making grief something they had to hide. Tears filled Maya's eyes. Caleb smiled softly and whispered, Aye, Mommy. Julian nodded, adding, We love you. Then silence. Not empty silence, but one filled with breath, warmth, and something unexplainable. When the boys were tucked into bed, Alexander stood in the hallway with Maya. You were right, he said. I wasn't trying to be right, Maya replied. He smiled faintly. I was too harsh, too disciplined. I thought control was the answer. Turns out softness matters just as much. Maya looked at him carefully. So what now? I want you to stay, he said simply. Not just as a nanny, as someone they trust and someone I trust. Her eyes glistened. On my terms? He nodded. Absolutely. Huh? She tilted her head. That's going to include bedtime prayers. He chuckled. I wouldn't have it any other way. Just as Mia turned to leave for the night, the boys peeked out from their room. Daddy, Caleb asked. Yeah, bud. Thank you for asking Miss Maya to come back. Julian added, best prayer ever. Alexander smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. Best decision I've made in a long, long time. No. The morning after Maya's return, the house felt different. Not just to the boys, but to Alexander himself. There was a quiet hum of peace in the air. For the first time in weeks, the twins woke up on their own, wandered into the kitchen, and greeted their father with soft smiles and messy hair. He was already there, awkwardly flipping pancakes, wearing an apron that looked comically out of place on his tailored slacks. "Morning, boys," he said. Julian peeked over the counter. "Are those chocolate Kips?" "I may have gone a little overboard," Alexander admitted. Caleb tilted his head. "You burned the last ones," Alexander chuckled. "Don't remind me." Maya entered moments later, her presence like a breeze brushing through the room, gentle, steady, grounding. She wore simple jeans and a blue blouse, her curls tied up, eyes alert and warm. "You're cooking?" she asked Alexander, raising an eyebrow. "I'm attempting to," he corrected. "Smells like enthusiasm," she teased. They all sat at the table together, a rare moment. Even before Emily's death, Alexander had always eaten separately, busy with conference calls or international markets. But now he was there watching the boys tell silly stories between bites. Julian leaned across the table mid-laugh. "Daddy, guess what? Caleb told a joke at breakfast." "Oh, really?" Alexander smiled. "Let's hear it." Caleb grinned. "Why did the pancake go to therapy?" "Why?" Alexander asked. "Because it felt flat." Oh, Maya laughed first, then Julian, then Alexander, shaking his head in mock despair. After breakfast, the boys went out to the backyard, their toy spaceship in hand. Mia began cleaning up, but Alexander stayed seated, stirring the remains of his coffee. "I don't know how long this will last," he said quietly. Mia glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "This peace, this calm part of me keeps waiting for it to fall apart again." Mia wiped her hands on a towel. "Alexander, peace isn't something that just falls into your lap. It's something you practice. The boys are adjusting because they feel safe again. That's not an accident. That's you showing up." He hesitated, his voice lower now. I didn't realize how afraid they were of me." Maya walked over, sat down across from him. "You weren't cruel," she said gently. "You were hurting. You were trying to control your pain by controlling everything else. I've seen it before. Parents afraid to feel, so they ask their children not to feel either." Alexander looked away. "You never taught them to cry," she continued, "but they had to. And you're lucky they found a way to do it without falling apart." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening but not breaking. Later that afternoon, Alexander watched from the upstairs window as the twins played in the grass. They built a pretend rocket launch site using garden stones and popsicle sticks. Maya sat nearby with a book, occasionally peeking up to remind them not to dig too deep. He wasn't just watching them, he was studying them. Their joy, their ease, the way they moved like they belonged to the world again. It struck him he hadn't just been an absent father. He'd been emotionally unreachable. Later, when Mia came inside to prepare snacks, Alexander met her in the hallway. "There's something I haven't told the boys yet," he said. Mia turned to face him. "I haven't been to Emily's grave since the funeral. Not once." Mia's expression softened. "That's not unusual, Alexander. Grief isn't linear. I know, but I think it's time. I want to take the boys. I think it's something we need to do together." Maya nodded. "Do you want me to come?" He paused. "Would you?" "Of course." The next morning, under an overcast sky, Alexander drove the three of them himself, the boys, and Maya to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. The boys were unusually quiet in the back seat, each holding a small bouquet of hand-picked wild flowers. When they arrived, the gate creaked as it opened. Alexander parked under an old oak tree and stepped out slowly, his breath visible in the chilly morning air. They walked together down the narrow path, Maya holding Julian's hand, Alexander guiding Caleb. When they reached the modest headstone, white marble engraved with Vivian Grace Reed, "Beloved wife and mother," the boys stood still, their heads slightly bowed. "Alexander killed first." "I'm sorry it took me so long to come here," he whispered. Maya stood a respectful distance behind, giving them space. Caleb placed his bouquet down. "Hi, Mommy. We miss you," Julian added. "We talk to you every night now. I hope you hear us." Alexander's hands trembled as he reached out and brushed a leaf off the stone. "I've been trying to be strong, too strong for them. For myself, but I've learned something. Strength isn't pretending you don't feel. It's letting yourself feel and still standing back up." His voice broke slightly. "I've made mistakes. I've pushed people away, people who were only trying to help." He looked over his shoulder at Maya. She met his eyes. "I want to do better," he said. "For them? For you? Me?" The wind stirred. The leaves rustled softly. It felt like Emily was there. Caleb looked up. Daddy, yes? Can we come here again sometime and talk to her? Alexander nodded. As often as you want. They lingered a little longer. The four of them not saying much, but it didn't feel empty. It felt whole, complete. That evening, after the boys were asleep, Alexander sat on the back porch with Maya. The stars peeked through the navy sky, and the distant sound of crickets filled the silence. I think today was the first day I let go, he said. Maya nodded. You don't have to carry it all alone anymore. He looked at her, eyes earnest. You've given them something I never could, and you've given me something I didn't even know I needed. Maya smiled gently. You gave it to yourself. I was just there to remind you how. He leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the sky. I don't know if I believe in prayer, he said, but I believe in healing. That's a start, Maya whispered. And for the first time since Emily's passing, Dorian Reed closed his eyes. Not to block out the world, but to breathe it in. Saturday morning arrived with golden sun pouring through the wide windows of the Reed estate. The smell of blueberry muffins drifted from the kitchen as Maya moved with ease. Her apron dusted with flour, humming an old gospel tune under her breath. She hadn't sung like that in years. Not since before the move, not since losing her younger brother to illness. But something about this home, about these boys, made the songs come back. Alexander stepped into the kitchen just as she set down a plate. He looked rested, softer. His usual armor of control, the crisp suits, the clipped tone had gradually worn thin. Did you just hum? He asked with a half smile. I suppose I did, she answered, surprised herself. I don't know that I've ever heard anyone hum in this house, he said, sliding into a stool at the counter. It's oddly comforting. Maya smiled. Then maybe the house needed it. Caleb and Julian came barreling down the stairs moments later, their socked feet skidding on the hardwood. Miss Maya, Daddy said we can go to the park today. Alexander nodded. Thought it might be good to get some fresh air. Can we bring the kites? Julian asked, eyes wide with hope. Of course, Maya said. The park was only a 15-minute drive away, nestled beside a small lake lined with weeping willows and wooden benches. It was a favorite spot of Emily's. She used to bring the twins here before they could even walk, resting them on a blanket under the trees while she sketched in her notebook. When they arrived, the wind was perfect, steady, but playful. The boys raced ahead, kites in hand, the strings unraveling like laughter behind them. Maya and Alexander followed at a slower pace, the grass crunching beneath their feet. I haven't been here since. Well, since Emily passed, Alexander admitted, scanning the familiar landscape. She used to draw here, didn't she? Maya asked. He nodded. She said the trees reminded her of her childhood in Georgia, said the willows looked like they were crying for the world. Maya stopped walking. They don't look sad to me. They look like they're holding stories, old ones. Alexander smiled faintly. She would have liked that. They found a bench near the lake where they could watch the boys run in dizzy circles with their kites. For a while, there was nothing but the wind and the shrieks of childhood joy. Then Maya asked, Do they know much about her? About Emily, I mean. Alexander exhaled slowly. Bits and pieces. I've told them what I thought they could handle, but I've been too careful, too guarded. Mine. You think if you tell them the whole story, it'll hurt more? Maya said. Yes, he admitted. And no, I think it'll hurt me more. Maya looked at him kindly. They don't just need facts, they need her. The sound of her laugh, the way she danced when no one was watching, the stories only you can give them. He nodded, eyes glassy. You're right. Start small, she encouraged. A story at bedtime, one memory, one moment. That's all it takes. That night, after the boys had bathed and wriggled into their pajamas, they curled up on either side of Alexander in the reading nook. The room smelled like lavender and old books. Maya leaned against the doorframe, silently watching. Boys, Alexander began, clearing his throat. Do you remember that time we went to the beach with Mommy? Caleb's eyes lit up, where she buried Julian in the sand up to his neck. Alexander laughed. Exactly. And you thought he'd be stuck there forever. My Julian giggled. She told me crabs were going to nibble my ears. She did. Alexander nodded, smiling. She was always teasing. But do you remember what she did right before we left that day? The boys thought for a moment. She picked up a shell and whispered into it. Caleb said. Alexander nodded. She said every shell holds the last whisper of the sea, and that if we listened carefully, we could hear the ocean missing us when we left. Julian blinked. I remember that. She said we belong to the waves. Caleb added. Alexander's voice grew quiet. That was her always finding poetry in the ordinary. Silence fell over the room, soft and thick like a blanket. And then something surprising happened. Alexander's face trembled, his jaw tightened, his eyes brimmed. He looked down, tried to blink it away, but a single tear escaped. Caleb reached up, gently touched his father's cheek. Daddy, are you crying? Maya stepped forward but didn't interrupt. No, Julian whispered. He's not crying, Maya. He's remembering. And in that moment, Alexander didn't correct them. He didn't explain it away. He simply let it be. Later, after the boys were asleep, Alexander found Maya in the kitchen again making tea. You were right, he said. Maya smiled, not looking up. About what this time? About the stories? About how they need her, even if it hurts. And so do I. Maya poured 2 cups, handed him one. You're doing the work. That's what matters. He nodded, then hesitated. Maya, there's something I've been thinking about. She raised an eyebrow. That sounds serious. I want to make some changes, he said. To this house, to this life. I don't want the boys growing up thinking love is something quiet and private. I want them to see it, hear it, feel it. And what does that look like to you? She asked. He looked down at his tea, then up at her. It looks like dinners together. Walks in the park, bedtime stories that don't end when the lights go out. And it looks like someone like you staying. Not just as a nanny. Maya stilled. Alexander, I'm not asking for anything more than your presence, he said quickly. Just stay. Keep being the voice they trust, the warmth they need. And maybe if you can keep humming those songs. Maya laughed softly. You're not as complicated as you think. Is that a yes? He asked. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. And outside, beyond the quiet of the kitchen, the night air was still like the pause between heartbeats, full of something new and something healing. The morning fog hung low outside the Reed estate, casting a silver hue over the garden. Inside, the warmth of routine had returned. Maya prepared breakfast while Caleb and Julian sat at the kitchen table, drawing pictures of dinosaurs and pirate ships. Alexander was in the living room finishing a call with his COO, though he kept glancing toward the kitchen like he didn't want to miss anything. Maya noticed it. She'd started noticing a lot about him lately. The way he listened more carefully. The way his footsteps were slower, softer, and the way he smiled now, not just out of politeness, but from something real. Are you drawing a T-Rex with sunglasses? She asked Caleb with a grin. He's not just a T-Rex, Caleb said proudly. He's a DJ T-Rex. Oh, Mia said, pretending to be shocked. Clearly, I'm behind on dinosaur fashion, Julian chimed in, and he has headphones made of cookies. Obviously, Maya nodded. Alexander finally joined them, coffee in hand. DJ Cookie, Rex, sounds like someone we should invite to family night. The boys' eyes lit up. Family night? Yeah, Alexander said. We never really had one. I thought maybe Friday nights we could do something together. Games, movies, whatever you 2 monsters want. Maya glanced at him surprised. This was new voluntary family bonding. Julian clapped. Can we do s'mores and watch that movie where the dog flies a plane? Caleb added. Alexander smiled. The boys waited wide-eyed. You have to let Miss Maya come too. Caleb and Julian cheered without hesitation. Yay! Miss Mia's part of family night. Maya smiled, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Alexander noticed it. Later that day, after the boys were down for their nap, he found her folding laundry in the den. Something on your mind? He asked gently. She paused, then folded a towel slowly. They're getting attached fast. Alexander leaned against the door frame. Is that a bad thing? It's not bad, she said carefully. But it's a line I've been afraid of crossing. He stepped closer. Because of Emily? Maya looked up. Because I'm not their mother. I don't want them to confuse comfort with replacement. Kids do that, especially when the grief is fresh. He nodded. I get that, but I think you're underestimating how smart they are. I'm not their replacement mother, Alexander. But I'm not a stranger either, and if I stay too long and then disappear again, her voice trailed off. You're afraid of hurting them. Yes, she said quietly, and of hurting myself. There was a pause between them. A long, honest pause. I won't ask you to be something you're not, Alexander said. But Maya, you are something to them. Whether you ask to be or not. Mia folded another shirt in silence. I'm trying to build something real here, he continued. Not just recover from what I've lost, but grow from it. I can't do it alone, and they trust you in a way I may never fully understand. Maya looked at him, the weight of years behind her eyes. And what about you, Alexander? Do you trust me? The question hung in the air. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, reached for the stack of laundry, and began folding with her quietly, side by side. That Friday night, family night debuted. The living room transformed. Blankets piled on the floor, string lights hung across the fireplace mantel, and a popcorn machine borrowed from Alexander's eccentric cousin buzzed in the corner. Caleb wore a cape. Julian wore pajama pants and a fireman's hat. Maya wore fuzzy socks and carried a tray of s'mores supplies. Alexander, much to everyone's surprise, wore a hoodie with a cartoon astronaut on it. "What is that?" Maya asked, pointing at his sweatshirt. "I was told I needed to embrace comfy core," he said dryly. "Apparently, this is what that looks like. You look like a dad trying to infiltrate a teenage sleepover," she teased. He shrugged. Close enough. They watched the movie, the ridiculous one with the dog flying the plane. And halfway through, Julian crawled into Mia's lap. Caleb curled up next to his father. For a moment, it felt like a family untouched by grief. But midway through the second movie, Julian whispered something. "Miss Maya, do you think Mommy can see us having fun?" Maya hugged him gently. "I think if she can." She's smiling. Caleb looked up at his father. "Do you think she'd be okay if we're happy?" Alexander's throat tightened. He looked at Maya, then back at his sons. "I think she'd be relieved that you're happy," he said softly. "She'd want that more than anything." Julian nodded sleepily. "Then I'm glad." After the boys were tucked in, Maya stayed behind to clean up. She stacked dishes in the kitchen, humming without realizing it. Alexander stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You know," he said, "I always thought family was about structure, responsibility, expectations. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt real." Maya replied, "Real." He watched her for a long moment. "Would it scare you if I said I've started thinking of you as part of our family?" She turned slowly, searching his face. "A little," she admitted. "Because once people call you family, they expect you to stay." "And what if I asked you to stay?" he asked. "Then I'd have to ask how you mean it," she said, voice calm but firm. "As the nanny, as a friend, as something else?" Alexander stepped forward. "I don't have all the answers. I just know this house didn't start to feel like home again until you came back." Maya looked down at the counter, then back up. "I care about them, Alexander, deeply, but I also have a life, dreams. I've put some of them on hold just to get through these past few years." "I don't want to take anything from you," he said. She studied him. "But do you know what you're asking me to give?" They stood in that tension, real, honest, adult tension, not built on romance, but on trust, grief, and something deeper forming beneath the surface. "I'm asking you," he said slowly, "to consider staying. Not forever, not blindly, just a little longer, until we figure out what this is." Maya didn't reply right away, but she didn't say no. And as she turned off the kitchen lights, she said, "Let's just take it one Friday night at a time." Alexander smiled. It was enough for now. It had been 3 weeks since family night became a tradition in the Reed household. What began as a one-time attempt at reconnection had evolved into something sacred, an evening the boys counted down to, the staff adjusted their schedules for, and Alexander himself protected on his calendar with uncharacteristic resolve. Friday evenings were no longer just a break from work. They were a declaration. This family matters. But outside the warm cocoon of home, the world had not paused. Alexander's company, Reed Technologies, was preparing for a major acquisition. The board was pressuring him to return to full-time operations. His inbox overflowed with contracts, briefings, and urgent invitations. But for the first time in his career, Alexander didn't leap to respond. Instead, he was busy helping Julian pick out glow-in-the-dark stars for the ceiling of their bedroom and debating whether Caleb's imaginary friend, Captain Pillowbeard, deserved his own seat at dinner. Still, not everyone was thrilled by the shift. It was during a Saturday breakfast when the knock came sharp, fast, impatient. Maya opened the door to find Lorraine Langford, Alexander's longtime executive assistant, dressed in a navy pantsuit and an expression that could crack glass. "Is Mr. Reed available?" Vanessa asked. "He's in the sunroom with the boys," Maya replied. Cautious. Vanessa stepped inside uninvited, heels echoing like gavel strikes across the marble. Alexander appeared moments later holding a juice box and looking every bit the part of a dad caught off guard. "Vanessa," he said, surprised. "What are you doing here on a weekend?" "We need to talk," she said firmly. "Now." He led her to the study. Maya stayed back but listened as she moved quietly through the kitchen nearby. "The board is concerned," Vanessa began. "You've been skipping meetings, delegating major decisions, and dodging press inquiries. This acquisition is too important for you to disappear." "I haven't disappeared," Alexander replied calmly. "I'm just reprioritizing." Vanessa's brows lifted. "By playing house?" His expression darkened. "Watch your tone. You're not yourself," she said, ignoring the warning. "The Alexander I know never let emotion get in the way of business." He stood. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that version of me wasn't sustainable." Vanessa narrowed her eyes. "Is this about the nanny?" He froze. "This is about my sons and the fact that for the first time since Emily died, I'm actually showing up for them. And what about Reed Technologies? I built that company to give them a future," he said, voice rising. "What good is it if I sacrifice the present to do it?" Vanessa stared at him, stunned. Finally, she said coldly, "You'll lose the board's confidence if this continues." "Then maybe they're not the right board." Later that evening, after the boys had gone to bed and the house had settled into its quiet rhythm, Alexander found Maya on the back porch sipping chamomile tea under a string of warm lights. "She was right, he said, sitting beside her. "Vanessa?" Maya asked. She didn't sound particularly warm. "She's worried I'm throwing away everything I've built." Maya looked at him. "Are you?" He considered it. "No, I'm just realizing I built it all without balance. I worked so hard to create a future. I forgot to live in the now. I forgot that my boys need me, not my success." Maya nodded. "There's no substitute for presence." "I was always terrified of being a father who failed," he admitted. "So I overcompensated with rules, with structure, with control. I thought grief was something you outsmart, but it's not." She turned to him. "It's something you sit with. You survive, and you're doing that." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done that too, haven't you?" Maya's eyes softened. "My little brother, Micah William. Cancer took him when he was 9. I was 15. My parents couldn't speak his name for years, but I talked to him every night. I still do sometimes." Alexander swallowed hard. "And that helped?" She nodded. "Because people don't fall apart when they're seen, Alexander. They heal. The boys are healing. So are you." He exhaled. "And you?" Maya smiled faintly. "Maybe a little. Being here has stirred up things I buried long ago, but it's also reminded me that love doesn't die with the people we lose. It keeps showing up in drawings, in bedtime hugs, in burnt pancakes." He chuckled. "I'm never living that down, am I?" "Not a chance," she said. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the air between them warm and charged. Then Alexander turned to her. "Maya, would you ever consider staying longer? Not just as a nanny," but she held up a hand gently. "I know what you're asking. And I need time. Not because I'm unsure of what this means to me, but because I want to be sure it's what's best for the boys and for us. I've seen too many families confuse healing with attachment." He nodded. "Take all the time you need." She looked at him steady and clear. "But I'm not going anywhere for now." And that's something. It was more than something. It was hope. The next morning, Alexander sat in the garden with the boys. The sun filtered through the branches. Caleb was braiding grass into something resembling a bracelet. Julian was talking to a ladybug. "Daddy," Caleb asked. "Yes, Bud. Do you think Mommy sent Miss Maya to us?" Alexander looked at Maya, who was watching from a distance with a gentle smile. He thought about fate and coincidence and second chances. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I do think Mommy would be glad she's here." Julian looked up. "Do you think Miss Maya will stay forever?" Alexander looked over at Maya again, their eyes meeting. "I hope," he said quietly, "that she stays as long as her heart tells her to." "No." And with that, the boys returned to their games. The garden filled with laughter and light, and something more fragile but stronger than anything Alexander had built before. Belonging. It had been a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that arrived like a whispered promise. The boys were still asleep, their room a fortress of stuffed animals and scattered Legos, the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls wafted through the halls. Mia's doing. Of course, Alexander had offered to help, But after burning toast 2 days in a row, he was gently reassigned to dish duty. Maya stood barefoot in the kitchen, moving with ease, a soft gospel tune humming from her lips. She didn't know Alexander was watching her from the doorway. Coffee mug in hand, expression unreadable. He stepped forward slowly. "You always hum when you're at peace." She glanced back, smiling. "Not always. Sometimes I hum to find peace." He nodded. "Seems to be working now." They stood in companionable silence for a few moments. The only sound, the oven timer ticking down. Alexander finally spoke. "I've been thinking about something. Something you said the other night about people healing when they're seen." Maya turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Yes." He looked out the window where the garden shimmered with dew. "I've spent so many years hiding pain behind performance. I knew how to win. I didn't know how to feel." "No, you're feeling now," she said softly. "But I don't know what to do with it." "You don't have to do anything," she said gently. "Just let it be real." Alexander set his mug down, more firmly than he meant to. "But what if being real disappoints them? What if it disappoints you?" Maya's voice was steady. "You're not a disappointment, Alexander. You're a man learning to be present. There's no handbook for rebuilding a broken heart, but you start by showing up." Oh, before he could answer, the sound of small footsteps echoed down the hall. "Daddy, Miss Maya, come quick!" Julian shouted breathlessly. Caleb trailed behind, holding something tightly in his little hands. "We found something in Mommy's room." Alexander and Maya followed them upstairs, curiosity blooming. Emily's room had remained untouched since her passing, her journals still stacked neatly on the bedside table. Her scarf draped over the vanity chair, her perfume bottle collecting dust like a quiet ghost. "Are you two supposed to be in here?" Alexander asked gently. "We were just looking for Mommy's necklace," Caleb said, "the one with the blue stone." Julian said it helps him feel close to her. Maya gave Alexander a look, one that said, "Let them." The boys rushed to the nightstand and held out a small velvet-bound notebook. "We found her prayer journal." Julian whispered, eyes wide. Alexander froze. He reached out slowly, taking the notebook with reverence. It was worn at the edges, the cover soft with years of use. He opened it, breath-catching as he saw her handwriting, slanted, beautiful, unmistakable. He flipped through pages of prayers, poems, lists of things she was grateful for. March 15th, Caleb said his first sentence today. He asked, "Where'd Mommy go?" I told him I'm always close, even when he can't see me. I think he understood. April 7th. I'm scared. The doctors are running more tests, but I'm praying for strength for Alexander. He doesn't pray, but I do enough for both of us. June Dix. The boys are getting so big, I worry they'll forget the sound of my laugh. I hope Alexander reminds them how much I love to dance. Even when no one was looking, Alexander's hands trembled. Maya placed hers over his. "She wrote for you," she said quietly. "So you'd remember? So you'd feel?" He nodded, unable to speak. Caleb tugged at his sleeve. "Can we read it too?" Alexander took a deep breath. "Yes, but together." They sat on the floor, the four of them, and read passages aloud. Maya's voice filled the space when Alexander couldn't find his own. The boys listened with awe, hearing their mother's words like a song from the past. "I think Mommy's prayers still work," Julian said softly. "Because now we have Miss Maya." Alexander glanced at Maya, his eyes swimming. "She asked for strength, and somehow you showed up." Later that day, Maya sat alone in the garden, the journal still resting in her lap. Alexander approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "She wrote about you too," he said, sitting beside her. Maya looked over. "She did?" He nodded. "She called you a woman with quiet fire. Said you had the kind of presence that would change a house without even raising your voice." Maya blinked back sudden tears. "She barely knew me." "She felt you the same way I do," Alexander said. There was a pause, not awkward, just weighty. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm falling in love with you." Maya looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't expect you to say anything back," he added quickly, "and I'm not trying to replace Emily. I never could, but what we're building, it's real and it's slow, and I don't want to rush it. I needed to say it out loud." Maya nodded, her voice soft. "Thank you for saying it, and thank you for not asking me to rush." She reached over and took his hand. "We don't have to name it yet," she whispered. "We just have to keep showing up." He squeezed her hand gently. Every day. That evening, the boys were drawing again. This time, they each had a page from Emily's journal, copying her prayers in their own handwriting. not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. Alexander watched them, pride swelling in his chest. "What are you writing?" he asked. Caleb held up his page. "I wrote, 'Dear Mommy, thank you for the blue sky and for Miss Mia's hugs.'" Julian added, "And I wrote, 'Thank you for Daddy laughing again.'" Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, letting the tears come quietly. Healing didn't come in waves. It came in whispers, in cinnamon rolls and worn journals, in bedtime stories and new beginnings, and in the steady beat of love returning, one breath at a time. It was late October, and the leaves around the Reed estate had turned to gold and crimson. The air carried that sharp, smoky scent of a changing season. Maya stood by the window in the boys' room, helping Julian button his small flannel shirt while Caleb carefully folded a paper plane. "Are we still going to the fall festival?" Julian asked, bouncing on his toes. "Yes, sweet pea," Mia replied, smoothing his collar. "Your daddy's just grabbing the tickets." "Do they have candy apples?" Caleb chimed in, his eyes lighting up. Mia nodded. "And a pumpkin patch, hay rides, even a corn maze." Julian gasped. "Do we get lost in the maze?" "Hopefully just a little," Alexander said, appearing in the doorway. He was wearing jeans and a brown jacket that made him look more like someone's cool uncle than the CEO of a tech empire. Caleb looked up. "Are you going to race us in the maze, Daddy?" Alexander grinned. "Only if you think you can beat me." The boys squealed and ran downstairs, their excitement echoing through the halls. Maya lingered behind, pretending to fix the blanket on one of the beds. Alexander noticed. "You okay?" She turned slowly, just taking it all in. He walked over to stand beside her. Together, they watched the boys through the window as they played in the driveway. "It's been a long time since this house felt alive," Maya whispered. Alexander nodded. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to hear joy in these walls." She hesitated. "Do you think she'd be okay with this?" He didn't need to ask who she was. He answered softly, "I think she's more than okay. I think she's proud." The fall festival was a burst of color and noise. Families filled the park, laughter mingling with the scent of roasted corn and caramel. The boys ran ahead, holding small pumpkins, while Maya and Alexander strolled behind them. It was the first time they'd appeared in public like this as a unit. Not just a father with his kids, but a family. Several people recognized Alexander, of course, but he barely noticed. His attention stayed on Caleb's grin and Julian's determined hunt for the perfect pumpkin. After the hayride and cider tasting, they approached the corn maze. It was larger than expected, a woven sprawl of tall stalks and winding paths. Julian grabbed Maya's hand. "You're on our team," he declared. "Daddy and Caleb are the other team." Mia laughed. "Guess we'll see who's better at not getting lost." Alexander gave her a mock bow. "May the odds be ever in your favor." Inside the maze, the boys' laughter echoed between the stalks. Maya and Julian took several wrong turns on purpose, enjoying the silliness. At one point, Julian tripped and Maya caught him, her arms wrapping instinctively around his tiny frame. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "You always catch me." Her heart squeezed. Farther ahead, Caleb and Alexander stood under a patch of filtered sunlight. "Daddy," Caleb said quietly. "Yeah. I like it when Miss Maya comes with us." Alexander knelt down. "Me too, buddy." 0. Caleb looked up, a serious expression on his small face. "Are you going to marry her?" Alexander chuckled, caught off guard. "That's a big question. But do you want to?" Alexander paused. "I care about her a lot, and I want her to stay. But sometimes big feelings take time. You understand?" Caleb nodded thoughtfully, like when I wasn't ready to take my training wheels off. "Exactly like that," Alexander said. That night, back at the house, after the boys had fallen asleep with their pumpkins beside them, Maya found Alexander in the study. He was sitting on the couch with a folder open on his lap, but he wasn't reading it. "I should have known you'd sneak work into the evening," she teased gently. He looked up, caught red-handed. She walked in and sat beside him. "Long day, best day in a long time," he said. There was a beat of quiet. "Maya," he began, voice lower. "Now, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She sat up straighter. "Okay. Are you happy here?" The question landed like a stone in her chest. "I'm more myself here than I've been in years," she said truthfully. "But I'm also aware that this life, this family, it came out of grief. That makes things complicated." He nodded. "I know, but grief doesn't mean we're broken. It just means we've loved deeply." She looked down. It's hard to let go of the guilt, the fear that maybe I'm stepping into a space that doesn't belong to me. Alexander reached over and gently took her hand. This space doesn't belong to Emily anymore, he said, and she knew that. That's why she wrote in that journal. She was preparing us for the world after, and somehow that world included you. Maya's eyes welled. I don't want to rush anything. He said, I just want to say that if you do want to stay long term, there will always be a place for you here, not as an employee, as part of us. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. You know what I love about this house? She murmured. What? It holds space for both grief and joy. That's rare. He exhaled deeply. You taught us how, he whispered. Outside the study window, the wind moved through the trees, rustling the remaining leaves like whispered stories. The house, once so hollow, now pulsed with a quiet, beating heart. And as Alexander held Mia's hand a little tighter, he realized something profound. Healing wasn't about forgetting the pain. It was about making room for something new to grow beside it. Grief didn't leave. It learned to sit quietly beside joy and let it sing. The first snowfall came early that year. An unexpected blanket of white laid gently over the trees, roof tiles, and garden hedges of the Reed estate. It arrived overnight, quiet and soft. The kind of snowfall that muffled the world into stillness. The boys woke up squealing, faces pressed to their window panes. Snow angels, snowball fights, Julian shouted, nearly slipping on the hallway floor in his socks. Can we build a fort? Caleb asked, already tugging his sweater over his head backward. Alexander peeked out of his bedroom, amused. Boys, it's barely 6:30, but the snow, Julian insisted, grabbing his father's hand. Maya was already in the kitchen, whisking hot cocoa on the stove. She had a sixth sense for mornings like this, moments that called for warmth before chaos. She turned just in time to see Julian run in with mismatched gloves and a huge grin. There's snow, Miss Maya. So I've heard, she smiled. Got the cocoa ready. You'll need it before heading out. Caleb entered next, holding something behind his back. We made something for you. For me? Maya crouched down. Caleb pulled out a small card made of construction paper with glitter glued along the edges and a drawing of 4 stick figures holding hands. 2 small ones, one tall and one with curly hair. That's us, he said proudly. You're part of our family now. Maya stared at the card, her throat catching. Thank you, sweetheart. Julian leaned in. Do you like it? I love it, she whispered. Alexander stood in the doorway watching the exchange. He'd never seen Maya cry before, not like this. Quiet tears, the kind she tried to blink away quickly, but didn't hide. She rose to her feet and caught his gaze. They're incredible. So are you, he replied simply. That afternoon, the backyard became a winter battlefield. Snowball fights broke out behind hastily built forts. Maya chased the boys with comically large snowballs, while Alexander pretended to negotiate a ceasefire behind a garbage can lid-turned shield. At one point, Julian slipped on the snow and landed flat on his back. Maya rushed over, but he was already laughing. I felt like a snow pancake, he giggled. You okay? She asked. I'm okay, he said, looking up at her. 'Cause you're here. Something about the way he said it struck her. Not just casual affection, it was security, assurance. That evening, the house was filled with the sound of the fireplace crackling and wet clothes spinning in the dryer. The boys, exhausted, snuggled under a blanket on the couch, watching the Polar Express. Alexander sat beside Maya, their shoulders barely touching. I saw your face earlier, he said quietly, when Caleb gave you that card. She smiled softly. It caught me off guard. They meant every word. Maya took a breath. It's strange. I've worked with families before, loved kids, but this feels different. Like I'm not just filling a role, like I belong to them. Too, you do, Alexander said without hesitation. She looked at him. And to you? He didn't flinch. Yes. It wasn't a grand confession, just truth, and in that moment, it was more powerful than any declaration. Later that week, Maya stood at the edge of the garden path, her phone pressed to her ear. The voice on the other end was warm but worn. Maya, her mother said, I've been waiting to hear from you. I know, Mama. I'm sorry. You sound different. Are you okay? I'm more than okay, Maya replied. I've found something. Or maybe it found me. She hesitated, choosing her words. I'm living with a family. The father lost his wife last year. 2 boys there. She paused. They've stolen my heart. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then does he treat you well? He does. with respect, with kindness. And do you love him? Maya blinked, the word hanging in the air. I'm still figuring that out. But I know this. When I look at him, I don't see a broken man anymore. I see a father trying. And when I see the boys, I see healing. Her mother sighed. You always did carry light, Maya. Just remember to save some for yourself. I will, she said, tears stinging her eyes. That Friday, family night came with a new twist. Tonight, Alexander announced, is storytelling night. No movies, just good old-fashioned stories. The boys booed in jest, but quickly got excited when Maya pulled out a large quilt and laid it in the middle of the living room. They all sat together under its warmth. Alexander began. This is a story about a brave knight who thought he didn't need anyone. He built a castle made of rules and filled it with silence. Julian interrupted. That's a sad castle. It was, Alexander nodded. But one day, 2 tiny dragons came along loud, messy, and full of questions, and then a woman with fire in her heart knocked on the gate. What did the knight do? Caleb asked, eyes wide. He was scared at first, Alexander said, glancing at Maya. But slowly he opened the gate, and together they made the castle a home again. The room was silent for a moment, the story settling like dust in sunlight. Julian curled into Mia's side. That's my favorite story ever. Caleb yawned. Mine too. Now, as they drifted off to sleep on the couch, Mia looked at Alexander. You really were that knight, he smiled, and you were the fire before bed. As Alexander tucked the boys in, Julian looked up sleepily. Daddy, yes. Can we stay here forever with you and Miss Maya? Alexander's heart twisted. I hope so, he said, but you know what matters most. Julian blinked slowly. Home isn't a place, Alexander said. It's who tucks you in? Julian smiled. Then we're already home. And in that moment, Alexander believed it. For the first time since Emily's death, he felt not just hope, but wholeness. A new chapter wasn't just beginning. It was already being written. Night after night, story after story in whispered prayers, spilled cocoa, and small sticky hands reaching for comfort. Grief still lived in the corners of the house, but so did laughter. And that, Maya had taught him, was how healing looked. Not perfect, but real. The first holiday season since Emily's passing approached like a quiet tide lapping against the edges of the Reed household. Thanksgiving was just days away, and the air was filled with cinnamon, the soft crackle of fireplaces, and something unspoken, a kind of anticipation wrapped in fragility. Maya stood on a step stool in the dining room, carefully hanging garlands above the windows. Outside, the garden was rimmed with frost. Inside, warmth spread from room to room in the form of scented candles, laughter, and the hum of life slowly rebuilding. Alexander walked in holding 2 cups of tea. You're decorating already? Maya smiled down at him. Traditions start somewhere. Might as well start now. He handed her the tea. You've turned this house into a home. She stepped down, accepting the cup. I didn't do it alone. Matt. They stood in silence, sipping together, watching as the twins raced past the hallway in superhero capes, their joyful shrieks echoing through the halls. Do you ever feel like we're living someone else's life? Alexander asked quietly. Maya turned to him. No, I feel like we're finally living ours. Thanksgiving Eve brought its own energy. Turkey thawing, pies cooling on windowsills, and a list Maya had taped to the fridge titled, What We're Thankful For. Oh, each family member had written one thing each night leading up to the holiday. It was Caleb's idea, his latest entry. I'm thankful Miss Maya reads with voices. Julian's. I'm thankful Daddy knows how to make pancakes now. Kind of. Alexander's first entry had been brief. Thankful for laughter, but his latest read, thankful for second chances. Ma's was simple. Thankful for belonging. That night, after the boys went to bed, Alexander sat with Maya in the living room, sorting old photographs Emily had taken over the years. He held up one. It was a candid shot. Emily sitting in the garden, barefoot, head thrown back in laughter, the boys crawling over her like puppies. I didn't even know we had this one, he said, his voice low. Maya looked over. She had a way of capturing joy without trying. He nodded. I want the boys to remember her like this. Not sick, not fading, but alive, full of mischief. You can show them that, Maya said. You're the keeper of her stories now. He ran a hand through his hair. Some days I feel strong. Other days I feel like a tower of glass held together with tape. Ma's gaze softened. Even strong trees bend in the wind. What matters is that they stay rooted. He looked at her. And you? What keeps you rooted? Maya exhaled slowly. Faith, memory, the people I've lost, the children I've cared for, and lately, she glanced toward the boy's bedroom. Love. Alexander's throat tightened. Do you think we'll ever get to say that word freely? Not with fear, but with certainty. She didn't hesitate. We will when the time is right. Thanksgiving morning dawned with sunlight pouring through the windows and the unmistakable chaos of preparation. The kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. Maya wore a flour-dusted apron, laughing as Julian stirred mashed potatoes with a spoon too big for him. Caleb stood on a stool, his tiny hands forming imperfect rolls from dough. Alexander, in rolled-up sleeves, basted the turkey and double-checked the playlist Maya had curated, soft jazz and soulful classics. The house pulsed with a rhythm of its own. Just before dinner, as the final touches were set, the doorbell rang. It was unexpected. Alexander wiped his hands and opened the door to find his sister, Ivy Reed, standing there in a burgundy coat, holding a bottle of wine and wearing a look of careful uncertainty. Ivy Reed? He said, surprised. You came? She offered a hesitant smile. You invited me. He nodded, stepping aside. Still, I wasn't sure. She stepped in, her eyes scanning the transformed home. It's warm in here. I mean that literally and otherwise. Maya emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands. Hi, I'm Maya. Ivy Reed extended a hand. I've heard about you. All good things, mostly from two very enthusiastic 5-year-olds. Maya chuckled. I hope I can live up to their storytelling. Ivy Reed's eyes softened. You already have. Dinner was a blend of tradition and new beginnings. The table was full of food, of stories, of unspoken memories. Ivy Reed told childhood tales of Alexander that made the boys howl with laughter. Julian proudly declared himself Potato King. Caleb spilled cranberry sauce but recovered with grace. After dessert, as twilight set in, they all sat in the living room with cups of cider, the fire crackling low. Ivy Reed turned to Alexander. I wasn't sure you'd ever let someone new into this house. Alexander looked at Maya. I wasn't sure either. Ivy Reed leaned forward. But I'm glad you did. He nodded slowly. So am I. Caleb climbed into Alexander's lap. Can we say what we're thankful for again? Julian jumped up. Yes, one more time. Ivy Reed went first. I'm thankful for family that grows. Maya smiled. I'm thankful for second chances. Alexander looked at his sons, then at Maya. I'm thankful for what I almost missed. Caleb said, I'm thankful for stories. Julian nodded and Miss Mia's pancakes. They all laughed. Then Julian asked, Daddy, can we always do Thanksgiving like this with everybody? Alexander wrapped his arms around them. Yes, always. Mess. And as the fire crackled and the night wrapped itself around the house like a protective cloak, Maya felt something shift. Not just in the room, but in herself. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's story. She was part of the narrative now woven in. Not as a footnote, but as a chapter, all her own. The chapter where healing became a home. The day after Thanksgiving, the house was filled with the kind of stillness that only comes after something beautiful. Dishes were washed, leftovers packed away, and the faint scent of cinnamon and roasted turkey still lingered in the corners. Snow had begun to fall again, lightly dusting the hedges outside, while the boys lay curled on the couch under a shared blanket, giggling at a Saturday morning cartoon. Alexander stood by the window in the study, holding a cup of black coffee and staring out at the quiet yard. Behind him, Maya entered, her hair tied up in a loose bun, carrying a small box in her arms. I found something in the attic, she said softly. Alexander turned, setting his coffee aside. What is it? Maya placed the box on the desk. It's labeled Emily College. His breath caught slightly. I haven't seen that box in years. She stepped back, giving him space. I wasn't sure if I should open it, but I thought maybe today you'd want to. He nodded slowly, pulling the lid off. Inside were old photos, Emily in oversized sweaters, sitting on library steps, her hair longer and wild. A few yellowed papers, some old letters, a dried corsage, and then near the bottom, a leather-bound notebook. Alexander opened it carefully. It wasn't her journal this time. It was her poetry. She wrote these in the evenings, he whispered. She used to read them to me when we first started dating. I forgot. Maya stepped closer. She had a beautiful way with words. He read one aloud, his voice low, reverent. If I'm ever gone before you know it, don't build a statue. Just teach our boys to laugh with their mouths wide open. Tell them I danced with my shoes off and loved like I was unafraid. Let them remember me in sunshine and burnt cookies. He stopped, swallowing the sudden lump in his throat. Maya placed a hand gently on his shoulder. She knew exactly who she was and who you were. He looked up at her. And now I feel like I'm meeting her all over again. Not as my wife, but as a full complicated person. That's the gift of grief, Maya said softly. It stretches your love. It makes room for the whole person, not just the memory. Alexander looked down at the poetry again, his voice trembling. I want the boys to know her this way, not just as a story I tell, but as a woman they would have admired. Then let's show them, Maya replied. That afternoon, they set up a small memory corner in the den. The boys helped carefully taping up photos of Emily in college, adding her favorite scarf on the shelf and placing a framed poem beside a candle. Caleb stared at the candle flickering gently. It's like she's here. She always is, Alexander said, kneeling beside them. Just not the way we remember. My Julian asked, can we write her letters? Maya lit up. That's a wonderful idea. They brought out colored paper, crayons, and pens. Caleb wrote in large, uneven letters. Dear Mommy, I made a snow angel today. I hope there's snow in heaven. Julian's letter was quieter. I still miss your hugs. But Miss Moss are warm, too. I think you'd like her. Alexander didn't write right away. He sat watching his sons, watching Maya. His heart ached in a new way, not just for what was lost, but for how it was finding new space inside him. Later that night, he sat alone at the desk with Emily's notebook and wrote on the back page, I'm learning to love again. Not instead of you, but beside you. Thank you for making room. As the days rolled into December, the house transformed again. Pine garlands along the staircase, stockings hung with names stitched by hand, and the distinct sound of Christmas music playing softly in the mornings. Maya introduced the boys to a tradition from her childhood, writing small kindness notes and hiding them around the house for others to find. On the third day, Alexander discovered one taped under his coffee cup. You make pancakes better than you think, Caleb. That same evening, Mia found one slipped under her pillow. Thanks for helping me find the stars again, Julian. Alexander started participating too, surprising Maya with a folded note on her nightstand. You changed more than this house. You changed me. Maya didn't say anything when she found it. She simply touched it to her chest and smiled. One evening, as the snow fell thick and heavy outside, Ivy Reed returned for a visit. She brought cookies in a large binder. What's this? Alexander asked, pouring her tea. I've been organizing old family documents, pictures, birth records, even some letters from Mom to Dad back in the 70s. Maya joined them at the dining table as Ivy Reed opened the binder. We don't talk enough about where we come from, Ivy Reed said. Not just Emily, but all of us. I want the boys to know their roots. Maya looked through the pages. Black and white photos of Alexander as a child, his parents in front of a rusty old Buick. A photo of young Emily holding a tiny kitten. Alexander chuckled. She hated that cat. Scratched her every morning. Caleb and Julian joined the table, crawling into laps, eyes wide with curiosity. Who's that? Julian pointed. That's your grandma when she was younger, Alexander said. Was she nice? Caleb asked. Alexander paused. She was strict, but she loved us in her own way. Maya added softly. Sometimes love doesn't look like hugs. Sometimes it looks like packed lunches and saving every art project you ever made. The boys nodded solemnly. That night, Alexander and Maya sat together by the fire. The boys had fallen asleep under the glow of the Christmas tree. I never thought I'd feel full again, he said. Not after Emily. Not after losing myself. Maya leaned her head against his shoulder. Fullness doesn't mean nothing's missing. It just means you've made room for what is. He looked down at her. I want to keep making room for you. For them. For the messy beautiful now. She looked up. Then let's keep building. One day, one truth, one story at a time. And in the soft silence that followed, the past didn't disappear. It simply walked beside them. Quiet. Steady. Waiting to be understood. It was the kind of morning that hinted at unease before anyone spoke a word. The air inside the house was too still, the usual hum of laughter absent. Outside, thick clouds gathered, casting a gray pall over the Reed estate. The fireplace crackled quietly, but even its warmth couldn't chase away the creeping chill. Maya stood at the sink, rinsing mugs from breakfast. Her movements were slow, almost hesitant. From the living room, she could hear Caleb and Julian bickering low, tense voices instead of their usual cheerful banter. Alexander entered the kitchen, his eyes still adjusting to the light. "They're fighting over the iPad again," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "They've been at each other all morning," Maya replied softly. "Something's off." Alexander nodded, walking to the window. "It's more than just sibling stuff. They've been on edge since yesterday." Maya dried her hands. "Do you think it's about the letter?" Alexander turned, face tightening. "Maybe." The letter had arrived the day before. Plain white envelope. No return address. Addressed to Alexander in thick, careful handwriting. He'd opened it at his desk, expecting another anonymous donation request or a letter from an old college contact. Instead, it was from Emily's estranged sister, Lorraine. She hadn't attended the funeral, hadn't spoken to the family in nearly a decade. The letter was polite but firm. She wanted to reconnect, to see the boys. She hinted that Emily had expressed certain wishes in their last conversations, wishes regarding guardianship and family legacy. Alexander had said nothing in front of the children, but Maya had seen the letter and she'd read the subtle threat behind Lorraine's words. "She wants something," Alexander said now, voice flat. Maya walked toward him. "She says she wants to be in their lives." "She's never even met them," he replied sharply. "And now that they found stability, she shows up. It doesn't feel right." Maya hesitated. "Maybe she's changed. Or maybe she smells opportunity," he snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry. I can't let anything undo what we've built." "You won't," Maya said, placing a hand gently on his arm. "But we need to be prepared." "If she pushes this legally, I'll fight it," Alexander said without hesitation. They both knew it wasn't that simple. Later that day, Maya found Caleb sitting under the piano bench with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. His usually bright eyes were clouded. "Hey, love bug," she said, kneeling beside him. "You hiding?" Caleb nodded. "Want to tell me why?" He bit his lip. "Is that lady going to take us away?" Maya's heart sank. "Who told you that? I heard Daddy on the phone." He said, "Someone wants to see us. Someone Mommy didn't like." Maya sat cross-legged, brushing his hair from his forehead. "Sweetheart, no one is taking you anywhere. You're safe right here with your daddy with me. But why is Daddy so mad?" Caleb whispered. "Because grown-ups sometimes get scared too, when they don't know what's coming, but I promise whatever happens, you will not be alone." Caleb nodded, inching closer into her arms. "Can we still do the prayer thing, even if Daddy's mad?" "Especially then," Maya whispered, holding him tight. That night, Alexander stood in the doorway of the boys' room, watching as Maya read to them. They clung to her, quiet and somber. Their energy dimmed. When she finished the story, she kissed their foreheads and turned to leave. Alexander followed her into the hallway. "I heard what Caleb said," he murmured. Maya turned. "They're scared. I didn't want them to know yet. I was still deciding how to handle it." Children always feel the weight of adult storms, even when we try to hide it. Maya leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. "What if she fights for custody?" "She doesn't have a case," Mia replied. "You've been their sole guardian since the day Emily passed. The boys are thriving." "No court would take them from you." "But courts don't see hearts, they see paper," Alexander said bitterly. "What if Emily did say something in passing? What if she thought family meant blood?" Mia stepped closer. "You are their family, not because you're their father, but because you show up every single day. That's what they'll remember." He looked at her then. "Really?" "Looked. Do you believe we're strong enough for this?" "Yes," she said. "But not if you try to fight it alone." 2 days later, Lorraine arrived unannounced. Maya opened the door, her posture calm but guarded. The woman standing before her was in her early 50s, elegantly dressed. Eyes sharp with a hint of sadness that seemed more performative than genuine. "I assume you're the nanny," Lorraine said coolly. "I'm Maya. I care for the boys," Maya replied, voice even. Lorraine smirked faintly. "Of course." Alexander arrived moments later, his face unreadable. "You should have called," he said, stepping past Maya. "I didn't think I needed permission to visit my sister's children," Lorraine said, her tone syrupy. Alexander folded his arms. "You forfeited that right a long time ago?" "I made mistakes," Lorraine admitted. "But I want to make it right, Emily, and I reconciled, before she passed." He raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you didn't come to her funeral." "I was grieving in my own way." Alexander stared at her, cold and still. "You're not here to mourn. You're here to disrupt, Mia." Lorraine's eyes flicked to Maya. And you think she's the stable choice? Maya didn't flinch. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here because the boys love me and I love them. Lorraine looked back at Alexander. I'll see you in court then. She turned and walked away without another word. Alexander stood in the doorway long after the car pulled away. Maya approached slowly. So it begins. He nodded. Yes, but I'm not afraid. He looked at her. Because we're not fighting against something. We're fighting for someone. And as the door shut behind them, the storm had arrived, not with thunder, but with silence. Yet within the house there remained a flicker of light, of warmth, of two small hearts sleeping safely upstairs. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The days that followed Lorraine's visit passed like tightly drawn strings, quiet, tense, and vibrating with something unspoken. Maya moved about the house with more caution now, always aware of the undercurrent beneath the routine, the court date that loomed, the paperwork piling up on Alexander's desk, and the weight he carried in his eyes. The boys sensed it too. Julian clung to Maya more than usual. Caleb asked more questions at bedtime, questions with edges. Are we still a family? Or what if someone takes you away? One evening, as Maya tucked them in, Julian whispered, Miss Maya, if we pray really hard, can we make her go away? Mia paused, sitting on the edge of his bed. Prayers aren't magic spells, sweetheart, but they help us stay strong and kind, even when things feel scary. But she's not kind, Caleb added from his bed. Maybe not, Mia said gently. But we don't let someone else's meanness take away our peace. We hold on to what we know is good. Julian looked down. You're what's good. The words wrapped around Maya's heart like a scarf pulled snug in winter. She kissed both their foreheads. And you two are my reason to be brave. The next morning, Alexander stood in the kitchen holding a thick manila envelope. Inside was a subpoena. Lorraine had officially filed for partial custody. Her attorney claimed she had evidence of Emily's verbal intent, conversations that took place during private calls before her passing. It was flimsy, but not baseless. Not enough to dismiss. I have to tell the boys something, Alexander muttered, staring at the coffee dripping into the pot. I don't know how to prepare them. Maya approached carefully. Maybe don't start with what we're afraid of. Start with what's unchanging. He looked at her like, what? That they're safe? That they're loved? That no matter what courtroom we walk into, no judge can measure what happens inside this home. He took a long breath. You always know what to say. I just say what I would want someone to say to me if I were 5 and scared. Later that day, Alexander sat the boys down in the den, Maya beside them, her hand resting lightly on Caleb's back. I want to talk to you about something important, Alexander began. Remember how someone came to the house recently? Lorraine. The boys nodded, eyes wide. She says she wants to be part of your lives. And now we'll be going to a special meeting, like a very serious grown-up talk, where some people will decide if that should happen. Julian asked, will they take us away? Alexander shook his head quickly. No one is taking you anywhere, but you may hear things that feel confusing, and I want you to know this. He gestured around the room. This is your home, Maya, me, this life. You belong here. Caleb looked between his father and Maya. And you won't leave. Never, Mia said, her voice clear and steady. You don't have to earn our love. You already have it. The boys leaned into them. And in that moment, the 4 of them weren't just a family. They were a fortress. In the days leading to the hearing, the house shifted into quiet preparation. Alexander met with his lawyer. Maya wrote a letter. At the attorney's suggestion of formal character reference, but also a testimony of love. She stayed up late at the kitchen table, rewriting every sentence until the truth sounded just right. They are not just children I care for. They are my compass, my peace. And every day I show up, not because I'm paid, but because I believe God led me to them when they needed someone. And when I needed something to believe in again, she signed it with a shaky hand. Ivy Reed came to help, too. She offered to stay with the boys during court dates, brought files and old photographs, anything that could show stability, family, joy. I may not be their mother, Alexander said to her one night, but I've fought for them in every way I know how. Ivy Reed placed a hand on his. Emily would be proud, not just of your fight, but of the man you've become. The hearing arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. The courthouse was cold, sterile, the kind of place where truth felt like something buried in paperwork. Alexander wore a charcoal suit. Maya dressed simply but with dignity, her hair pulled back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lorraine arrived in pearls and a fitted blazer, her expression unreadable. The judge was a middle-aged black woman named Judge Renata Hall. Her presence was both commanding and maternal. She reviewed the documents silently before inviting each side to speak. Lorraine went first. Her attorney spoke of biological bonds, of family legacy, of the late Emily Reed's alleged intent. Then it was Alexander's turn. I won't pretend I've done everything perfectly, he said, standing. I've grieved poorly. I've made mistakes, but I have never once stopped showing up for my sons, and they are thriving, not because I'm some hero, but because love, real love, lives in our home. He glanced at Maya, and not just from me. Mia stood when called. Her voice trembled, but only slightly. I've seen these boys grow from grief into light. She said, they're not afraid to cry, to laugh, to ask questions. They still pray for their mother, and they know she's not forgotten. This isn't about blood. It's about who carries them when they can't walk on their own. Judge Hall looked at her for a long moment. Then at Alexander, then at Lorraine. After hours of discussion, legalese, cross statements, and pauses, the judge finally closed the file. Miss Lorraine, she said, your concerns are noted, but the court is not in the business of uprooting thriving children. Love, stability, and intention have been demonstrated here today. Your petition is denied. Alexander exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Judge Hall continued, softer now. Grief tears families apart or binds them together. I suggest you seek healing with these boys, not through legal battles, but through kindness if they choose it. Lorraine didn't respond. She gathered her purse and left without another word. That night, back at home, the boys were asleep before dinner. The weight of the day had caught up with everyone. Alexander poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Maya on the back porch. Snowflakes danced in the air like confetti. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You don't have to, Maya replied. We're in this together. He clinked his glass against hers. Still want to build this messy, beautiful life? She smiled. Every single day. No, inside. The soft sounds of breathing filled the upstairs hallway, where 2 little boys slept safely, unaware of how close they'd come to being torn apart from the only real home they'd ever known. But that storm had passed, and the house, though humble in its quiet, stood stronger than ever built, not of walls and wealth, but of promises kept. Prayers whispered, and love that didn't need to be proven in court to be real. The morning after the court ruling, sunlight poured into the Reed household like a warm blessing. It slipped between the curtains, kissed the tops of picture frames, and rested softly on the rug where Caleb and Julian lay side by side, building a sprawling Lego fortress that stretched from one couch leg to another. Alexander stood in the doorway, a mug of coffee in hand, watching his sons with an expression Maya had come to recognize. Quiet awe. The weight in his shoulders had lessened. He was still a man grieving, still learning. But now he moved with a lightness that had taken root in hard-earned soil. Maya approached from the hallway, holding a neatly folded pile of laundry. She paused beside him. You look like someone who finally believes the house won't fall. He smiled. I think for the first time, I know it won't. Downstairs, Ivy Reed was packing up her things. She'd stayed a few extra days after the hearing, helping with the boys, doing puzzles, and even attempting one of Mia's recipes with moderate success. As she zipped her bag, Mia stepped into the guest room. I wanted to say thank you, Mia said, handing Ivy Reed a wrapped tin of cinnamon cookies. Ivy Reed took it with a grin. You saved them, Maya. Not just the boys, my brother too. Mia shook her head. He saved himself. I just held the light when the path got dark. Nah. Ivy Reed looked at her, her tone quieter now. I don't know what's ahead for you two, but whatever it is, it's real. I see it. Maya didn't answer immediately. She pressed the tin closer to her chest. It's not easy, loving someone who's still healing. Maybe that's the purest kind, Ivy Reed replied. Love that waits, love that sees the bruises and stays. Anyway, with December stretching on, the boys became enthralled by the promise of Christmas. Every morning, they dashed to the living room to check their advent calendar, squealing over tiny chocolates or handwritten notes from Santa's helpers. Maya had introduced a new tradition, kindness slips. Each day, Caleb and Julian would draw a task from a jar, make someone laugh, give a compliment, or help set the table. It became a game of quiet giving, something even Alexander joined without fanfare. One night, after the boys had gone to bed, Alexander and Maya sat by the fire, stringing popcorn for the tree. The tree wasn't grand. It was small, modest, but adorned with handmade ornaments and paper snowflakes. It radiated warmth. I didn't grow up with much of this, Alexander admitted. My mother didn't decorate. Christmas was just a day off school. Maya glanced at him. What about Emily? She loved holidays. She did, he said, smiling faintly. But even then, I held back. I always thought joy had to be earned or that I'd lose it if I held it too tightly. And now he looked at her. Now I realize joy is meant to be shared. Sure, here is the text you requested. And maybe it's not something fragile. Maybe it's something we build. Bit by bit, Maya nodded, threading another piece of popcorn like this garland. He chuckled exactly like this garland. They fell into a quiet rhythm side by side, the fire crackling between them, the scent of cinnamon lingering from earlier baking. And just as the last thread of popcorn was tied, Julian appeared in the hallway, clutching his blanket. Maya rose. What's wrong, sweetheart? He rubbed his eyes. Had a dream someone took you away again. Maya knelt, pulling him into her arms. No one is taking me anywhere. I promise. Alexander joined them, placing a hand on Julian's back. You know what helps when I'm scared? He asked. Julian looked up, talking to someone I trust, and sometimes praying, even if I don't always know who's listening. Julian blinked. You pray now? Alexander smiled. I'm still learning, but I like how it makes me feel less alone. Julian hugged both of them. Can we do it together? Just a small one. Maya and Alexander exchanged a glance, then nodded. So there on the living room floor, the three of them bowed their heads. No grand words, no rehearsed phrases, just a whispered, thank you for our home, for the people we love. Please help us be brave, you. After Julian went back to bed, Maya looked at Alexander. You surprise me. I surprise myself, he said, but I've learned something about storms. Sometimes they aren't meant to be stopped. Sometimes they clear the air. A few days later, a letter arrived, this time with a return address. Lorraine, it was brief, handwritten, and without embellishment. Alexander, I was wrong about everything. I acted out of fear and pride. But when I left that courtroom, I saw your family for what it was whole. Not perfect, but real. If the boys ever want to know me, I will be here. But I won't force myself into something already sacred. Thank you for protecting them and her memory. Lorraine Alexander folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with Emily's poetry. Later, he showed it to Maya. She didn't have to write this, Maya said. No, he agreed. But maybe it's the start of her own healing, and they didn't speak of it again. Some things didn't need discussion, just understanding. On Christmas Eve, the house glowed. Carols played softly in the background. The boys set out cookies for Santa and wrote their final notes for the kindness jar. Maya read them aloud. Caleb, thank you for giving me a family. Julian's, I hope you stay forever, Miss Maya. You make the world softer. Alexander wrote one too, placing it in the jar just before midnight. I didn't believe in miracles, but this home is one. Thank you. As the clock struck 12, Maya stood by the window watching the snow fall. Alexander joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. He whispered, You came into our lives when we were shattered, soft, and instead of walking away, you stayed. She turned to him because broken things aren't worthless. They just need careful hands. He looked into her eyes. So what now? She smiled. Now we live fully, loudly, kindly. And with the snow falling gently beyond the glass and the quiet piece of family wrapped around them like a second skin, they stepped into the future. One prayer, one promise, one shared hope at a time. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. It blanketed the yard in layers of soft white, wrapped the trees like scarves, and turned the city into a painting of stillness. Inside the Reed house, time slowed too, but in a way that felt sacred, like the world had agreed to pause just long enough for healing to catch up. On the second morning after Christmas, Maya awoke to the sound of giggles downstairs. She pulled on a robe and tiptoed down the hallway, stopping outside the boys' room to peek in. Caleb and Julian had built a makeshift fort using bed sheets, chairs, and an army of stuffed animals. In the center of it all sat Alexander, crisscrossed on the floor, wearing a floppy paper crown and reading aloud from the Chronicles of Narnia. Maya leaned her shoulder against the doorframe and watched, warmth blooming in her chest. and with a mighty roar, Alan returned, greater than ever before. Alexander read, his voice rising theatrically. Caleb gasped. He came back. Alexander smiled. He always comes back. That's the magic of stories and of courage. Julian turned to Maya. Miss Maya, Daddy says he used to be scared to read aloud. Alexander raised a brow. Well, thanks for telling her that, champ. Mia laughed as she walked in. It's a good kind of scared. That means you're growing. Alexander met her eyes, and for a moment there was nothing between them but quiet understanding. No past, no courtrooms, no grief. Just now. Later that afternoon, Maya and Alexander found themselves alone in the kitchen. The boys were playing outside in the snow, bundled in layers like tiny astronauts. Ivy Reed had dropped off new scarves she'd knit herself, and the boys were thrilled to model them. Alexander was drying dishes while Maya packed away leftovers. He glanced over, watching her hum quietly to herself. Maya, he said after a long moment. She looked up. I've been thinking about something, and I'm not sure how to say it without sounding like I'm jumping ahead. Nan, she paused, closing the container lid. Say it badly if you must. I'll wait for the good part. He chuckled softly. You once said you weren't here to replace anyone, that Emily's memory was safe, and you've kept that promise. But you've also become something we didn't know we needed. Not just to the boys. Maya stilled. Her hands rested on the counter. Alexander, I know the past is messy. I know we're still stitching ourselves back together, but I also know what peace feels like. And when you're here, I breathe differently. The room held its breath. Maya turned slowly, her voice low. Are you asking me to stay or to start something new? He stepped closer. I'm asking if we can figure it out together. Not a label, not a timeline, just a life with laughter and questions and family dinners that sometimes burn. She smiled, eyes glistening. I thought you'd never ask. They didn't kiss, not yet, but their hands found each other naturally, like they'd always known the way. New Year's Eve arrived with less fanfare than in previous years. Instead of a party, the Reed house hosted something quieter, something truer. Ivy Reed came over with her husband. A few neighbors stopped by with cookies. Maya made a pot of gumbo that filled the kitchen with spice and comfort. Alexander surprised everyone by playing a song on the old piano clumsily, but with heart. As the clock inched toward midnight, the boys, bundled in pajamas, sat on the couch holding cups of warm cider. Can we stay up this time? Caleb begged. Alexander smiled. Only if you promise not to fall asleep on the couch and blame me for it. Maya handed out sparklers she'd saved from the summer. Outside on the porch, under the pale shimmer of moonlight, they lit their sparks just as the clock struck 12. Happy New Year, everyone shouted, laughter dancing into the sky. Julian tugged on Maya's coat. Miss Maya, do you think this year will be happier? She knelt down. I think it already is. Caleb asked. Even if it's still a little sad, she nodded. Even then, happiness doesn't wait for everything to be perfect. It just finds its way in. They watched the sparks fade, leaving trails of silver in the dark. No fireworks, no loud countdowns, just the soft, steady hum of family and hope. The next morning, Maya found a note on her nightstand. You once told me broken things can be beautiful. I finally believe you. She folded the note carefully and tucked it into the back of her journal. Later that week, the boys returned to school, their backpacks filled with new pencils and packed lunches shaped like dinosaurs, Mia's latest creative touch. Alexander walked them to the bus stop, holding their mittened hands the whole way. When he returned, Maya was at the dining table sorting through job postings. I've been thinking, he said, shrugging off his coat, about your work, your dreams. She raised an eyebrow. You're going to offer me a business loan now? He laughed. Not quite, but I was wondering if you ever wanted to open your own daycare or even a small learning center. We have space, that old carriage house on the edge of the property. Maya blinked. You'd let me use that? I'd help you build it if you wanted. You've given this family more than I can repay. I'd like to see your dream take root too. She sat back, stunned. He continued, softer. You've spent so long caring for others. Maybe it's time someone invests in you. She didn't answer right away, but her smile said, enough. By mid-January, the house settled into a new rhythm. School mornings, Maya's planning meetings with architects, Alexander balancing work with fatherhood, and the boys thriving in every direction. One evening after dinner, they gathered on the porch to watch the first full moon of the year. Mia wrapped a blanket around the boys as they leaned against her. Caleb whispered, "Miss Maya, will you still live with us when we're big?" Mia smiled. "I'll live in your hearts forever, but who knows? Maybe by then you'll have your own homes and you'll invite me over for dinner," Julian added. "And you'll still bring cookies always." "Oh," Alexander joined them, slipping his arm around Maya's shoulder. "And maybe we'll still be right here, just older, wiser, louder." "Definitely louder," Ma teased. They sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that heals. The moon glowed overhead, lighting the snow like a promise. A promise that after all the loss, the courtroom battles, the doubt, and the fear, love had remained. Not perfect, not easy, but true. And that was enough. Spring came early that year. The snow melted quicker than usual, revealing the soft earth beneath, eager to breathe again. Tulips began to peek out near the mailbox, and the old oak tree in the front yard budded with fresh green. Life in all its quiet determination moved forward in the carriage house on the edge of the property. The sound of drills and hammers now echoed most mornings. Alexander had made good on his word, hiring a small team to help Maya bring her vision to life. What had once been a dusty storage space was transforming into a warm, open-concept learning center full of sunlight and laughter waiting to happen. Maya stood in the middle of it one morning, clipboard in hand, surrounded by paint swatches and the faint scent of sawdust. She turned as Alexander stepped inside, holding 2 coffees. "Your favorite," he said, offering her one. "No sugar, extra cinnamon." She took it, smiling. "You're getting too good at this." He shrugged. "I'm just trying to keep up with you." They stood there for a moment, side by side, taking in the skeleton of what was becoming the garden room, the name Maya had chosen for her center. It was inspired by a verse she often repeated in her quiet prayers. "You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail." "I've been thinking," she said softly, walking toward one of the large windows. "About opening day, I'd like to do something small, just family, a blessing maybe." Alexander nodded. "You mean a prayer?" Maya looked over her shoulder. "Is that okay?" "I think," he said, stepping toward her, "that it would be exactly right." Meanwhile, the boys were blossoming in their own way. Julian had joined the school's early music program and brought home a tiny violin, which he insisted on practicing at 6 in the morning. It was more squeaks than symphonies, but Maya and Alexander applauded every note. Caleb, ever the observer, had taken to sketching. He carried a small notebook everywhere, drawing trees, birds, and sometimes quiet portraits of the people he loved. One afternoon, Maya opened her purse and found a folded sketch of her kneeling beside the boys, smiling with the sun behind her head like a halo. She showed it to Alexander that night, and for a long time, they just sat looking at it. Neither said much. They didn't need to. The Reed family story, once marked by grief and silence, had begun to hum with rhythm again. Each member was finding their voice, their path, and yet the echoes of the past hadn't vanished. They had simply softened into lessons. One rainy Tuesday, as Maya was preparing dinner, she received an unexpected call. "Miss Williams," the voice said on the other end. "This is Sister Helena from Blessed Hope Church. I believe you knew a young woman named Adriana Lee." Maya's heart skipped. Shonda Anda had been a friend from her teenage years, a troubled soul with a bright laugh and too many detours. They'd lost touch. "She passed away last week." The voice continued gently. "She didn't have much family, but she left a note. She mentioned your name." Maya swallowed hard. "What did it say?" "She said you were the only one who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She asked that if possible, you come to the memorial." Maya's hand tightened around the phone. "I'll be there that night." She told Alexander everything. He listened quietly, nodding, his expression one of respect. "You should go," he said. "And if you want, I'll go with you." The memorial was simple, a few rows of folding chairs under a canopy of trees, a scattering of people who'd known different versions of Shandanda. Maya stood up to speak, her voice trembling but steady. She was not easy to love. Maya began, but she was worth it. "She made me laugh at my lowest and once gave me her last dollar so I could buy dinner after my rent. Ate everything else. She struggled. Yes, but she tried, and that matters." Afterward, a young woman approached her holding a toddler. "Are you Miss Maya?" the woman asked. "I am." She talked about you like a sister, she said, eyes shining. Said you were the kind of person who saved people without making them feel broken. Maya blinked, tears forming. I didn't do much. You were there, the woman said. That's more than most. Driving home, Maya stared out the window. Quiet, Alexander reached over, taking her hand. You okay? She nodded. She nodded, just reminded how fragile it all. Island life. People, he squeezed her hand. You hold people together, Maya, like mortar between bricks. You always have. In early April, the garden room opened. It was a sunny Saturday. Ivy Reed helped decorate with streamers and fresh flowers from her garden. The boys wore matching boats and helped set out lemonade and cookies. Alexander gave a short, heartfelt speech, then stepped aside as Maya stood in front of a circle of friends, neighbors, and loved ones. I built this place for little hands and big dreams, she said. For children who need safe spaces, and for families still learning how to be whole. We plant seeds here not just of knowledge, but of love. She paused, smiling, and we water them with faith. Mick, then she bowed her head, whispered a quiet prayer of dedication, and opened the door. The garden room filled quickly with laughter, with chatter, with life. Caleb and Julian ran in first, claiming a reading nook by the window. Ivy Reed poured lemonade. A neighbor offered to donate books, and in a quiet corner, Alexander watched Maya move through the space she had dreamed into reality. His eyes filled with something unspoken. Later, as the sun began to dip, he found her standing beneath the cherry blossom tree out front. I've never been more proud, he said. She looked up at him. Neither have I. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box, not a ring, not yet, but a silver locket shaped like a heart. For everything you are, he said, placing it in her hand, and everything we still get to become. Maya opened the locket. Inside, a tiny picture of the four of them, her, Alexander, Caleb, and Julian, all laughing at the kitchen table. No titles, no expectations, just love, real, earned, and still growing. Summer arrived with a gentleness that made everything feel earned. The trees were full, their leaves heavy with life. The garden behind the Reed home had bloomed into something lush and wild. A place where Maya often sat with a book or her journal, while the boys chased fireflies and laughter floated like music through the dusk. The garden room had become more than a learning center. It was a second home to families who needed more than academics. It became a sanctuary, a place where stories were shared and burdens lightened. Parents lingered at drop-off just to talk. Kids arrived early and didn't want to leave. Maya had built more than a classroom. She had built a village. One warm Friday afternoon, she stood beneath the old oak tree, hanging hand-painted wind chimes with Caleb and Julian. Each one represented a child who had passed through the sense doors. Some bore names, others just initials and bright colors. The wind stirred, and the chime sang a soft, tinkling song. Caleb looked up. Will they always make this sound? Maya smiled. As long as the wind keeps coming, yes. Julian tilted his head. Is that like praying even when you can't see who's listening? Yes, Maya said quietly. Exactly like that. Later that night, after dinner and a sticky dessert of peach cobbler, Alexander and Mia tucked the boys into bed. Caleb was already half asleep, fingers still smudged with peach juice. Julian clutched the well-worn prayer card Mia had given him months ago. Can we pray for people we don't know? He asked drowsily. Of course, Alexander answered, brushing hair from his son's forehead. Even if we never meet them. That's the best kind of prayer, Maya said. The kind that asks nothing in return. They stood together after the boys had drifted off, the glow of the hallway light casting their shadows across the wall. You've changed them, Alexander whispered. And me, Maya shook her head gently. I didn't change you. I just reminded you of what was already there. May? He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady, unwavering. I've been thinking, he said, about what forever might look like. Maya blinked. You mean? He nodded. Not a rush, not a grand proposal, just the idea of it. You, me, them, this life, she smiled. The kind of smile that made her eyes shine forever sounds quiet and strong like a prayer. He leaned in and pressed his forehead to hers. Then let's keep praying. Weeks passed. The days grew longer. The house, once haunted by loss, now carried the warm thrum of renewal. One Saturday morning, Alexander found an old box in the attic full of Emily's things. Letters, photos, a silk scarf that still carried a trace of her perfume. He brought it downstairs, hard, heavy, but steady, and laid it on the kitchen table. When Maya came in, he didn't say a word at first. He simply opened the box. She sat beside him. "I kept this tucked away for a long time," he said, "because I didn't know how to hold grief and joy at the same time." Maya touched the edge of a photo. Emily, smiling beside a younger Alexander, her eyes bright. "You don't have to choose." He nodded. "I see that now." He pulled out a folded piece of paper, a note Emily had written in her final months, one he'd never read aloud. "If you're reading this, Alex, then I'm gone. But don't let our boys grow up without knowing joy. Find it again. And if someone kind shows up at your door, don't push her away." He handed the note to Maya. "She saw you," Maya said, her voice full. "Even before I arrived, she saw you," Alexander replied. "Before I ever could." By late August, the garden room was preparing for a new term. Maya had hired 2 assistant teachers, both women from the community, each with stories that had led them to education through resilience, not credentials. The opening ceremony included music, small speeches, and laughter that carried through the neighborhood. Julian played his violin, still more squeaks than music, but full of heart. Caleb presented a drawing he'd made, the Reed family under the cherry blossom tree with Maya in the center, arms open. "She holds us together," he said softly into the microphone. Maya wiped tears as the crowd clapped. Later, she found Alexander sitting on the back steps watching the children play. He looked up as she approached. "Have you ever thought about writing all of this down? What do you mean? Your story, the way it unfolded. People would read it, Maya, people who need hope." She sat beside him. Maybe one day, when the ending's clearer, he reached for her hand. "This is the ending, Maya. Not the final one, but the one where we stop running and just live." She exhaled. "Then maybe I'll start tomorrow." That evening, as the sun dipped low, the family gathered for dinner on the back patio. A simple meal, grilled vegetables, warm bread, iced tea. The boys lit small candles at the table, something Maya had started months ago. A way to end the day with intention. Caleb spoke first. "I'm thankful for school starting," Julian added. "And for cookies," Alexander smiled. "I'm thankful for second chances." Maya looked at each of them, her heart full. "I'm thankful for answered prayers, even the ones I didn't know I needed." The candles flickered in agreement. As dusk turned to night and fireflies blinked along the hedges, the Reed family sat together in a house that once held silence, hot now pulsing with belonging. There were no dramatic final words, no sweeping music, just the sound of forks against plates, the soft laughter of children, and the warm knowing that what had been broken was no longer just fixed, but transformed. And somewhere deep in the quiet of that night, a prayer rose, not shouted, but whispered. A prayer of thanks, a prayer for tomorrow, a prayer that would echo forever in the walls of the home they had built together. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures or sudden miracles. It often begins in the quiet, uncomfortable spaces of everyday life. Through grief, doubt, and hardened beliefs, we watch a man rediscover the beauty of connection, the power of faith, and the quiet strength of love that doesn't demand attention, but simply shows up. Day after day, we learn that family isn't defined by blood or perfection, but by those who stay, listen, and choose to grow alongside each other. That children see more than we think. And sometimes their simple acts of kindness and belief can teach adults how to hope again. And perhaps most powerfully, we see that redemption is possible for anyone willing to lay down pride and pick up compassion. No matter how broken the beginning, a story can still end in grace when love leads.